So imagine being handed a winning lottery ticket.
Oh, that is the dream, right?
Right. It's sitting right there in your palm, and it is, guaranteeing a future of just complete financial freedom.
Yeah, you've got the millions right there in your hand.
Exactly. But there is a catch. The instructions required to actually cash this ticket, they're written in this incredibly complex language that you just refuse to learn.
Oh, wow. Okay, that sounds incredibly frustrating.
It is.
Oh.
So every single day, you stare at this piece of paper that's worth millions, and, well, every single day you remain completely broke.
Because you can't read the steps to claim it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And eventually, you might start to believe the ticket is a fake, or that the lottery itself is just this giant scam.
Right, because it's easier to blame the system than to, learn the language.
Yes. But the truth is much more uncomfortable, right? The promise was totally real, but you lack the capacity to actually process it.
That is wow, that's a heavy analogy.
It is. And today we are looking at a framework that suggests this exact dynamic is happening with our deepest spiritual and life promises.
I mean, it is a profoundly jarring way to look at our unmet expectations.
Yeah, it really is.
Because, most of us have experienced that specific transition, going from this burning hope to just quiet, creeping disappointment.
Oh, absolutely. The silent disillusionment.
Right. You receive a promise, or maybe you suddenly catch this blindingly clear vision of your future trajectory. And for a moment, you just feel it in your bones.
You're hyped. You're totally bought in.
Exactly. But then, days turn into years, and the reality doesn't align with that glimpse, so the cognitive dissonance becomes really heavy.
It does. And we default to assuming the promise was just a flat-out lie.
Yeah, we think we were tricked.
And that heavy tension, that is the beating heart of our deep dive today. We are unpacking a really fascinating theological and psychological framework.
It's from a really dense book, right?
Yeah, it's a book by Oluwasemilogo Zahalla titled Why Prophecies Fail, Understanding the Pathways Between Revelation and Fulfillment.
Right, and it includes a foreword by Apostle S.J. Awaraku.
Yes, exactly. Now, right at the top, I want to clarify our mission for today. Because whether you are a deeply spiritual person who wrestles with these concepts in a religious context,
or you're just someone fascinated by the psychology of destiny.
Right. Destiny, human agency, how people navigate the future. We are going to objectively map out Zahalla's blueprints here. We're not taking theological sides.
We're just looking at the architecture of his argument.
Exactly. How spiritual promises are processed, how they get lost, and ultimately how they are fulfilled.
And his text is deeply ambitious because, he isn't writing this to invalidate the concept of prophecy or spiritual foresight.
No, not at all.
Quite the opposite, actually. He is offering a highly detailed, systematic framework to explain the actual mechanics of divine communication.
Yeah, he's basically looking at that exact gap we just described with the lottery ticket.
Right, that massive, painful chasm between revelation, which is what is spoken or perceived, and manifestation.
Which is what you actually experience in your everyday waking reality.
Exactly. And Zahalla argues that this gap, it's bridged not by some, wave of a magic wand.
Right. No fairy godmother stuff.
Right. It's bridged by rigorous human partnership, very precise timing, and the acquisition of specific knowledge.
Yeah, and the introduction of the book drops this massive thesis statement that really just stopped me in my tracks.
Oh, I know the exact quote you're talking about.
Yeah. He writes that prophecy does not fail because God lies. It fails because men often misunderstand the nature of prophecy.
It's such a heavy statement.
It is. And he calls out this growing disillusionment, specifically in the modern church, where people are fundamentally confusing prophecy with automatic prediction.
They treat it like a predetermined script.
Exactly. Like they're just reading lines in a play.
And that distinction, between prophecy and prediction, that is the absolute foundation of his entire framework.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that's a really important distinction.
Well, if we view a prophetic word like a script handed down by a divine director, we assume all the scenes are already set.
Right. The ending is totally locked in.
Yeah. And all we have to do is take a seat in the audience, eat our popcorn, and just watch the movie play out.
Just totally passive.
Exactly. But Zahalla argues that prophecy is absolutely not a fixed script of inevitable outcomes.
So what is it then?
He says it is a conditional invitation.
A conditional invitation. Man, I'm so glad you brought up the word conditional, because it immediately challenges the way most of us think about destiny.
How so?
Well, when I hear destiny, I think of something completely inescapable. Like no matter what you do, you're going to end up there.
Like a magnet just pulling you in.
Right. But a conditional invitation requires an RSVP.
Yeah.
You know, it requires actual action from you.
Exactly. And the text uses this deeply resonant biological metaphor. He draws from the Christian scriptures, specifically Luke 8.11, and he compares the spoken word, or the divine promise, to a seed.
Okay, a seed.
Yeah. Think about the biological reality of a seed for a moment. Inside a tiny, seemingly lifeless apple seed is the complete DNA.
The entire blueprint.
Right. The absolute genetic blueprint to become this towering, fruit-bearing apple tree.
It's all in there.
The potential inside that seed is perfect and completely unblemished. But if you leave that seed sitting on a dry concrete countertop,
it will never, ever become a tree.
Exactly. It's just going to sit there and dry out.
Right, because it requires an external environment to actually activate that internal blueprint.
Precisely. It requires soil. Requires water.
And sunlight, right.
Yeah, a very specific climate. And crucially, it requires the passage of time.
Time is the big one.
Huge. So Zahalla asserts that the divine realm releases the word, the seed. But the earthly realm, meaning the human recipient, must respond.
By providing the right environment for it to germinate.
Exactly. Heaven provides the potential. Earth must provide the conditions.
Okay, I hear that, but I have to admit I struggle with this concept a bit.
Where's the friction for you?
Well, if we were operating within a theological framework where the divine creator is completely all-powerful, entirely sovereign,
right,
then why doesn't he just force the seed to grow? Why put this immense burden of manifestation on the flawed human receiver?
That is a very fair question.
Because it almost feels like a built-in excuse, like passing the buck that when things don't work out, it's always our fault. Oh, you didn't water the seed enough.
Yeah, that is the natural friction point. And it's a tension Zahalla addresses head on.
Okay, how does he justify it?
The framework he presents operates on the absolute principle of divine partnership.
Partnership.
Right. If a supreme being simply forced an outcome, regardless of human readiness, character, or cooperation, it would fundamentally violate human free will.
It would just be manipulation.
Exactly. In this theological view, the divine is looking for mature participants to co-create reality with, not just passive spectators to be moved around like pieces on a chessboard.
That makes me think of the difference between going to a fortune teller versus going to a master architect.
Oh, I like that. Expand on that.
Well, if you visit a fortune teller, they gaze into a crystal ball and declare your inescapable fate, right?
You'll meet a tall, dark stranger.
Exactly. Or you will fall into sudden wealth. It's entirely passive. You just go home, sit back on the couch, and wait for fate to knock on your door.
You don't have to change anything about your life.
Right. But if you hire a divine architect, they don't give you a crystal ball. They hand you a blueprint.
A blueprint shows what can be built.
Yes. It shows this magnificent multi-story house that you are invited to live in. But you still have to go to the hardware store, buy the bricks, hire the crew, and break a sweat pouring the foundation.
The blueprint is a promise of potential, but it doesn't physically build the house for you.
Exactly. And if you don't build it, you can't blame the architect.
That analogy captures the essence of Zahalla's argument perfectly. And, this is a great moment for anyone listening to just pause and run an internal audit on their own life.
Oh, yeah. Listeners, think about this.
Think about the moments where you have waited passively for a breakthrough.
We've all done it.
Have you ever treated an exciting potential future, whether it was a career aspiration or a relationship you felt destined for, or a deeply personal spiritual promise, as a convenient excuse to stop putting in the daily unglamorous work?
Like, oh, God's going to give me this job, so I don't need to update my resume.
Exactly. Zahalla warns that turning spiritual excitement into practical passivity is the leading cause of aborted destiny.
Aborted destiny. Wow. And he says that when people do this, they gather notebooks full of powerful prophecies, right? But they lack what he calls the spiritual intelligence to actually manifest any of them.
Yeah, they become spiritual casualties.
Walking around deeply wounded by what they perceive as divine delay or divine betrayal.
When really they just didn't pick up a hammer to help build the house.
Right. Which naturally brings us to the mechanics of how we actually handle these blueprints when they are handed to us.
Yeah.
Zahalla deconstructs the idea that a prophecy is just a single perfect flash of lightning that hits you all at once.
Yeah, he breaks down the anatomy of a prophetic word into a highly vulnerable 3-stage process.
Okay, what are the stages?
Receiving, interpreting, and delivering.
Receiving, interpreting, delivering.
And understanding the sequence is vital because it pinpoints exactly where and how the divine signal gets scrambled by human interference.
Okay, let's start with the first stage, receiving. He describes this as the intersection of the infinite and the finite.
Correct. Receiving is the initial moment the human spirit perceives something from a realm beyond itself.
Like getting a signal.
Yes, but the crucial detail here is that the human mind is finite. It cannot possibly comprehend the entirety of an infinite thought all at once.
It's like trying to download a terabyte of data into a tiny kilobyte flash drive.
So that is a perfect way to put it. The system would just crash. Therefore, the reception is almost always partial.
It's fragmented.
Right. It doesn't arrive as a fully formed, high-definition documentary. It arrives in fragments, a fleeting impression, a highly symbolic dream, an unshakable inner knowing, or even just a sudden emotional weight.
And because it's partial, it has to move into the second stage, which Zahalla suggests is the most dangerous checkpoint of all, interpreting.
Oh, without a doubt.
This is where the human mind takes that raw, fragmented data and attempts to assign a definitive meaning to it.
And this is where the system so often breaks down completely.
Why is it so dangerous?
Because interpretation is entirely filtered through the complex machinery of the human psyche.
Meaning all of our baggage comes into play.
Exactly. Your personal biases, your childhood traumas, your emotional maturity, your specific theological background, and your deeply held personal desires. They all inevitably bleed into the signal.
The human filter is just inherently muddy.
Very muddy.
I want to really dig into this because the psychology of it is absolutely fascinating. The book warns intensely about the danger of blending personal desire with divine revelation.
Yeah, it's a huge pitfall.
Think about a time you wanted a specific outcome so badly. Maybe you were interviewing for a job you desperately needed, or you were just infatuated with someone you wanted to marry.
We've all been there.
Right. And when you want something with that level of aching desperation, you start seeing signs everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. The universe is speaking to you.
You see the company's logo on the side of a bus, or you hear the person's name in a coffee shop, and your brain immediately locks onto it as divine confirmation.
It feels so real in the moment.
But how much of that is actual destiny? And how much is just our own cognitive confirmation bias working overtime to give us the answer we want?
It is incredibly difficult to untangle, which is why the interpretation stage is so precarious.
It's like playing with fire.
It is, because if you have an intense pre-existing hunger for a specific outcome, your subconscious will absolutely hijack a vague spiritual impression and weaponize it to feed that hunger.
Oh, wow. Weaponizing the prophecy.
Yes. You will take a generalized sense of, say, future joy, and immediately interpret it as, I am going to marry this specific person next year.
You force the puzzle piece to fit.
Exactly. So if our internal filters are so prone to self-deception and confirmation bias.
How does the author suggest we actually fix the filter? I mean, how do we separate what we desperately want to hear from what is actually being communicated by the blueprint?
Zahalla points to 2 very specific stabilizing anchors: rigorous discernment and profound humility.
Humility. That's a tough one for a lot of people.
It is. Often the receiver has a limited spiritual vocabulary, or they just lack the humility to admit they simply don't understand the fragment they've received.
Because human beings hate ambiguity.
We despise it. We want answers now. So instead of sitting with the mystery, they force an interpretation.
They project their own desires onto it.
Right. Giving a vague impression an absolute definitive meaning that was never intended. Humility within this framework is the courage to hold a revelation loosely.
To just say, I don't know yet.
Yes. To say, I perceive this fragment, I feel its weight, but I do not yet have the maturity or the context to declare its full interpretation.
It's the willingness to leave the puzzle piece on the table without forcing it into the wrong spot, just to feel a sense of completion.
Exactly. You just let it sit there.
But, even if you manage to receive the fragment perfectly, and by some miracle you interpret it without letting your own ego get in the way.
Which is rare.
Very rare.
Yeah.
But if you do, you still have to navigate the third stage, delivering.
Right. Delivering is the actual outward communication of the word to its intended recipient or audience.
And the mechanics of delivery seem wildly complex because they rely on so many variables, right?
Oh, entirely. Timing, linguistic precision, tone of voice, environmental context.
The book points out that you can hold a perfectly pure revelation and completely botch the delivery, thereby destroying the intended effect.
Absolutely. Let's look at the mechanism of why that happens.
Okay, give me an example.
Suppose someone receives a genuine divine directive to correct the destructive behavior of a friend.
A tough conversation.
Right. And the intention of the blueprint is restoration and healing. But if the deliverer is having a bad day or struggles with pride, and they deliver that word of correction laced with anger, impatience, or condescension, what happens?
The recipient's defense mechanisms immediately flare up. Walls go up.
Exactly. The psychological mechanism of anger triggers an immediate fight-or-flight response in the recipient.
They're not listening to the divine word anymore. They're just reacting to the hostility.
Precisely. The recipient's capacity to hear the divine instruction is entirely neutralized by the hostile tone of the messenger. The delivery method actively sabotages the message.
Wow.
Similarly, if a deeply personal, sensitive word meant for a private individual is recklessly delivered in a public setting.
Oh, that'd be awful. It creates humiliation rather than encouragement.
Exactly. In all these scenarios, a genuine revelation derails. And to an outside observer, it looks like a failed prophecy or a divine lie, when in reality, the divine material was simply mishandled by the human supply chain. Mishandled by the supply chain. That's a great way to phrase it.
Yeah.
So if human handling, our biases, our lack of vocabulary, our poor delivery, is the primary bottleneck, then the only logical solution is to upgrade the human capacity.
Yes, the capacity has to expand.
And this shifts the entire conversation.
Yeah.
Because Zahalla makes a bold, almost provocative claim by quoting Proverbs 11.9. He writes, "Through knowledge shall the just be delivered." And he posits that it is sheer ignorance, not a lack of divine power, that most frequently aborts a prophecy.
This is a monumental paradigm shift in the book. He argues that knowledge is the literal structural bridge between the ethereal realm of revelation and the physical realm of manifestation.
So without knowledge, there's no bridge.
Right. Without that bridge, the promise just remains trapped in the ether.
Okay, so what kind of knowledge are we talking about here?
He breaks this down into two distinct dimensions of knowledge. The first dimension is the revelation itself, the glimpse of the blueprint, the seed which is freely given. It is a gift.
You didn't have to work for the vision.
Exactly. But the second dimension is the understanding and the stewardship of that revelation. And this is not freely given.
This is the part where you have to put on the hard hat.
Yes. It must be aggressively pursued, meticulously studied, and relentlessly cultivated by the individual.
Let's ground this in a real-world scenario,
Yeah.
because the example he gives regarding financial elevation is devastatingly clear.
It really hits home.
Imagine someone receives a completely genuine, undiluted prophecy about massive business expansion. The divine architect says, "I am handing you the blueprint for a multi-million-dollar enterprise that will change your family's lineage."
An incredible promise.
Right. The word is true, the potential is real, but internally, that individual operates with a deep-seated poverty mindset.
Yeah. They operate out of a psychology of complete scarcity.
They're terrified of losing what little they have.
Exactly. They are terrified of taking calculated risks. Maybe they view money as inherently corrupting, or perhaps they literally just lack basic financial literacy.
Exactly. If heaven hands you the keys to a massive business, but you don't know how to balance a spreadsheet, or you're so plagued by imposter syndrome that you sabotage every networking relationship you build,
the business will collapse.
it will. If you are terrified of hiring employees because your unresolved trauma makes you believe everyone will eventually betray you, you will micromanage the enterprise into the ground.
You'll destroy it from the inside.
Right. The divine promise didn't fail. You simply lack the psychological and practical knowledge required to steward the reality of the blessing.
Your internal framework literally repelled the external manifestation.
It's like trying to plug a massive industrial machine into a standard living room outlet. You're going to blow a fuse.
That's exactly it. And the implications of this are staggering. It radically shifts the believer's posture.
Because it forces you to look in the mirror.
Right. When a promise doesn't materialize, the default human reaction is accusation. God failed me, the universe lied to me, I was forgotten.
It's always someone else's fault.
But Zahalla's framework demands profound, often painful self-reflection. It forces you to ask, Did I lack the internal emotional capacity and the acquired practical knowledge to sustain the very thing I was begging for?
Ouch. That is a hard question to ask yourself.
It is. But it transforms the individual from a passive victim of a capricious universe into an active, responsible participant in their own destiny.
It is incredibly empowering to realize you hold that much agency. But you're right, it's deeply confronting. Because it means the delay isn't a mystery, it's a mirror.
Yes, it reflects your lack of preparation.
It means I have homework to do. I have to read the books, I have to go to therapy to fix my poverty mindset, I have to learn the skills.
You have to build the bridge.
Right.
Right.
But this raises another huge problem in the book. Okay, let's say I do the homework. I acquire the knowledge. I build the internal capacity to handle a multi-million-dollar business.
Okay, you're ready.
Am I ready now? Can I just kick the door open and force the manifestation to happen today?
No, because capacity without timing is just misdirected energy.
Timing.
And that introduces the most complex variable in this entire discussion, the mystery of time.
This part of the text was wild.
It is. Zahalla unpacks time by looking at two very distinct Greek concepts that ancient philosophers and theologians used to categorize reality: chronos and kairos.
Okay, let's break those down. Chronos is our standard sequential time, right?
Correct.
The ticking of the clock.
Yeah.
Monday turns into Tuesday, January turns into February. It's quantitative.
Exactly. Chronos is the relentless chronological march of time. It is the ordinary environment we live in every day.
Just standard operating procedure.
Right. But kairos is entirely different. Kairos is qualitative.
Qualitative.
Yes. It is the opportune moment. It is a designated, highly pregnant window of time when the divine realm interrupts the natural order to bring a specific, accelerated purpose to pass.
You know, I think the best way to visualize this is through the analogy of surfing.
I'd love to hear how you map that out.
Well, if you go out into the ocean, the water is constantly moving, churning, rolling. That constant, endless movement is chronos.
The baseline environment.
Right. You can paddle around in it all day and exhaust yourself, but you won't get a ride. You're just splashing around. Kairos, however, is the exact moment the water draws back and a massive wave swells beneath you.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. Because you cannot control the wave.
Nope. You can't make the wave happen.
You cannot manufacture a kairos moment through sheer willpower. The wave is an act of sovereign timing. But if you are not already out in the water, positioned correctly and actively paddling when that wave arrives, it will simply roll right past you.
And if you miss the wave, you're just sitting in the flat water of Chronos again, wondering why you aren't moving.
Precisely. Zahalla explains that missing a kairos moment, whether through hesitation, fear of failure, or just a simple lack of spiritual discernment to recognize the shifting of the tide.
It can look exactly like a failed prophecy.
Exactly.
Right.
To the untrained eye, it looks like God didn't show up. But the opportunity was genuinely presented, the door was unlocked, the wave swelled. The individual just chose not to step through while the kairos window was active.
But see, this idea of missing the window brings up a terrifying concept that the book introduces: multiple futures.
Yes, chapter 14.
Zahalla suggests that our lives are not a single, unalterable, straight-line script. And I really have to push back here because doesn't this entirely contradict the concept of a divine destiny?
How so?
Well, if I can miss the wave, and there are multiple branching futures based on my choices, aren't I constantly at risk of just ruining God's master plan for my life?
It sounds chaotic.
Yeah, it sounds like we are one bad decision away from derailing the universe.
It is a theological paradox that scholars have wrestled with for centuries, right? The collision of divine sovereignty and human free will.
It's the ultimate debate.
But Zahalla balances this tension beautifully by using the metaphor of a vast, complex map. Life is not a single highway with no exits.
Like a train on a track.
Right. It's not a train. It is a sprawling map filled with countless junctions, intersections, toll booths, and checkpoints. Prophecy, he argues, does not reveal the only path. It reveals the optimal pathway.
The fastest route.
Exactly. It illuminates the specific route that is perfectly aligned with divine intention and your highest possible purpose.
But because we possess absolute free will, we are the ones in the driver's seat navigating that map.
Exactly. We make the turns. And small, seemingly insignificant compromises, missing a kairos window, failing to pursue the knowledge we just discussed.
For allowing toxic external influences to sway our judgment.
Yes. These things cause a subtle divergence from the optimal path. You take a left turn when the blueprint indicated a right.
And in the moment, it doesn't seem like a big deal. You just took a scenic route.
Right. But over the course of 5 or 10 years, those tiny fractional divergences compound, leading you to a completely different destination on the map.
So a different future actually manifests because of your agency. But what about the sovereignty of the architect? I mean, does God just abandon you because you took a wrong turn?
Not at all. Zahalla affirms that the divine architect is sovereign and possesses the infinite wisdom to gracefully reroute us.
Think of it like a divine GPS recalculating the route.
Exactly. Recalculating. The destination of ultimate purpose remains, but the path you take to get there might now involve unexpected detours, extra mileage, and unnecessary rough terrain.
You're taking the dirt road instead of the highway.
Right. The divine is capable of redeeming the wrong turns, but Zahalla insists we must stop pretending that our daily human agency doesn't undeniably shape which specific experiential future actually manifests in our lifetime.
It's like God provides the GPS destination, but if you insist on driving your car into a swamp, He will help pull you out, but you're still going to get muddy.
You're going to get very muddy.
The delay and the mess are the consequences of your driving. And realizing that the steering wheel is actually in our hands demands an intense level of focus, right? Which naturally transitions into the necessity of what the book calls the art of retreat and the grind of discipline.
Yes. Moving into part 6. This is where the emotional high of prophecy meets the pavement of reality.
And reality hits hard.
It does. Human beings are addicted to the adrenaline rush of revelation. When someone receives a prophetic word or a massive vision for their life, there is usually a visceral reaction.
People cheer, they weep, they celebrate the confirmation of their potential.
But Zahalla points out a harsh, unavoidable paradox. We love to celebrate the excitement of the word, but actual destiny only responds to consistency.
Excitement starts the engine, but consistency is the fuel that gets you across the map.
Beautifully said.
And the first step of consistency he talks about is the concept of retreat. Now, in our hyper-connected, constantly frantic modern culture, we tend to view the idea of retreat as a form of surrender.
Like running away.
Right. We think of it as a spa vacation, or just tapping out because we can't handle the pressure.
But Zahalla reclaims the word and frames retreat as a highly strategic, offensive military maneuver.
Retreat as an offense. I love that.
Yeah. Retreat is the intentional, disciplined withdrawal from the noise of the world. In the foreword, there is a distinct mention of the dominating forces of modern culture.
The endless scroll of social media.
Exactly. The bombardment of artificial intelligence, the sheer volume of voices competing for our attention every single second. Retreat is the tactical decision to silence all of that in order to return to the source of clarity.
Because you cannot possibly hear the subtle whisper of a blueprint adjustment if you are permanently standing in the middle of a screaming crowd.
You'll just go deaf to it.
You have to get quiet to recognize those kairos moments.
Exactly. And once you emerge from that tactical retreat with renewed clarity, you are immediately tasked with applying rigorous self-discipline.
The daily grind.
Discipline, in this specific framework, is defined as doing what the blueprint requires long after the emotional dopamine hit of receiving the blueprint has faded.
It's easy to build when you're excited.
But discipline is the unglamorous, repetitive daily grind. It is waking up early to study the financial principles for the business you haven't started yet.
It is doing the emotional therapy required for the marriage you aren't in yet.
Exactly.
Okay, I am tracking with everything you were saying, but I have to stop and ask a really vulnerable question here.
Go for it.
I'm struggling with a fundamental tension. If I have to do all this relentless work, if I have to acquire the knowledge, master my own psychology, perfectly time the kairos wave, and grind out this intense daily discipline, aren't I basically just saving myself?
I see where you're going with this.
Like, it sounds like I am the ultimate architect of my life.
Yeah.
Where does the sovereignty of God actually fit into this equation? If it's all up to my performance, I'm going to collapse under the pressure.
That is the ultimate, exquisite paradox of mature faith. And Zahalla navigates it beautifully. He explains that we are called to a posture of engaging fully while holding loosely.
Engaging fully, holding loosely.
We must act with absolute, uncompromising responsibility. We study, we prepare, we discern the timing, we maintain our discipline as if the entire outcome depends entirely on our sweat.
What?
But simultaneously, we must rest in profound, submissive humility. After we have done absolutely everything within our human power, we have to recognize that the final manifestation, the overarching tapestry of history, is held by a sovereign power that cannot be coerced, manipulated, or overridden by our human negotiation.
Wow.
We do our part with excellence, but we surrender the final timeline and the ultimate outcome to wisdom that sees the whole map, not just our small section of it.
Engage fully, hold loosely. That is an incredibly difficult tightrope to walk.
It takes immense maturity.
It really does. It requires a level of emotional regulation that most of us just don't naturally possess.
Right.
And walking that tightrope inevitably requires enduring a lot of waiting.
Oh, the waiting room.
Which brings us to the final stages of the book, where Zahalla discusses working out the word and the transition into the maturity of faith.
Yes, part 7.
He points out that early faith, the faith you exhibit on day one of receiving a thrilling promise, is actually quite easy.
It is easy because the initial revelation brings a rush of clarity. It feels like magic.
You're riding high.
Right. But mature faith is the faith that must survive the waiting room. It is the faith that remains intact on day 500 when absolutely nothing in your physical reality indicates that the promise is true.
When the bank account is still empty and the relationship is still broken.
Exactly. And Zahalla offers a profound comfort here. He explains that these agonizing delays occur not because the word was invalid and not because the divine architect forgot about you.
Then why do they happen?
Delays occur because the human capacity to sustain the immense weight of the manifestation is still under construction.
A massive blessing requires a massive foundation.
Precisely. If you put a 1 million-pound building on a foundation built for a garden shed, what happens?
The structure will instantly collapse and just crush everyone inside.
Exactly. The delay is the time required to pour deeper concrete.
I want to speak directly to you, the listener, for a moment. If you're currently in a season of waiting, if you are holding on to a promise, a vision for your family, a career goal, or a hope for healing, and you are just staring at the clock, feeling like you've been totally forgotten, the author's framework suggests this delay is not a failure.
It's not a punishment.
Right. It is a deliberate refinement. It is the divine realm testing the integrity of your foundation. Are you anchored in deep, unshakable conviction, or were you just running on the fumes of reactive excitement?
The waiting room is a gymnasium.
Yes. The waiting room is not a punishment. It is the gymnasium where your spiritual and emotional muscles are being torn down and rebuilt, specifically so you do not get crushed by the blessing when it finally arrives.
And if we look at the culmination of the book, in the chapter titled When Prophecy Finally Speaks, we finally reach the endgame of this entire process.
The moment of truth.
Yes. This is the elusive moment of manifestation. It is the day the unseen promise crosses the threshold into visible, tangible reality.
The business finally opens.
The relationship is restored, the healing is realized. But Zahalla issues one final, vital warning in this moment. Fulfillment is not the end of the story.
Wait, manifestation isn't the finish line?
Far from it. Human nature wants to treat the fulfilled promise as the end of the movie. We want the screen to fade to black so we can finally just relax.
Roll the credits. We won.
Right. But Zahalla argues that a fulfilled prophecy is merely a new, elevated foundation.
It's just level 2.
Exactly. The moment the manifestation arrives, it must instantly be guarded, actively stewarded, and built upon for the next level of purpose. The exact same rigorous discipline, humility, and knowledge required to obtain the blessing are required to maintain it.
Okay, let's do a quick recap, because we have journeyed through a massive amount of theological and psychological terrain today.
It's a lot to process.
It really is. So, according to the architecture mapped out by Zahalla, prophecy is fundamentally a partnership, not a passive magic trick.
It demands our participation.
Right. It requires accurate interpretation, demanding that we constantly check our own biases and desires at the door. It requires the aggressive pursuit of knowledge to build our internal capacity.
We have to build the bridge.
Yes. It requires the spiritual sensitivity to discern Kairos timing, knowing exactly when to paddle for the wave. And it requires the grueling, unglamorous discipline of consistency to bridge that vast gap between heaven's intention and Earth's physical reality.
It is a radical shift. It moves the human experience from a posture of passive, victimized waiting into a posture of active, intelligent, and mature stewardship of the future.
So we arrive at the final question. We spend so much of our lives looking up at the sky, frustrated, asking why the universe hasn't delivered on its grand promises to us.
We ask why our prophecies have failed.
Right. And why we are still stuck in the waiting room. But based on the mechanics of Zahalla's framework, perhaps the more terrifying and illuminating question to ask yourself tonight is this. If the exact massive future you have been desperately praying for was handed to you tomorrow morning, do you actually have the internal architecture, the emotional discipline, and the practical knowledge to survive it?
That is the question that completely shifts the locus of control back to where it belongs.
It really does. It changes everything. Thank you for joining us on this journey today. Keep digging into the texts, keep questioning the frameworks and biases around you, and keep exploring your own deep dives.